Good evening all and welcome to day 2 of Woods Week. Tonight we're going to be heading to the middle of nowhere for a very chilling collection of stories. So get comfortable. Don't forget to join me for the rest of the week and let the darkness take control. I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is also the most northern part of Europe. My home lies well above the Arctic Circle. This means, for those of you who are unaware, that we have very short summers where the sun never sets, and very long winters where the sun never rises. Those long and cold months of darkness in the end and beginning of the year have made us into an understandably superstitious kind. There are many tales meant to safeguard us growing up. You have Stalo, the mountain troll who steals children who wander too far from their homes. Meiling, who you will not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of babies, and the Nook, who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, wanting to drown unsuspecting swimmers. My story begins when I was 16. I had just gotten my hunting license and my father had even bought me a shotgun for my birthday. This was big for me, as I had always followed my father on hunting trips as a child, but never actually shot grouse myself. My father is the stereotypical northern Norwegian. He knows everything about the outdoors. He can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of macabre humor. Once his fingers got stuck in a saw at his workplace and peeled the skin of his middle finger like a banana peel. He promptly bandaged it up himself and kept going. He did not consider going to the doctors to get it looked at, before almost 2 weeks had passed and the stench of the bandages made him unbearable to stay in close proximity with. In the end, he needed a skin transplant and several weeks off work before his hand was remotely usable again. So the time of the year comes when the sun is out for a few hours in the morning, and me and my dad take the journey to the cabin. This includes an hour of driving and a further hour on a boat. You see, our cabin is in a remote area without any road access, so the only way to get there is by a ferry. This means we somewhat always know who is out there, since most people only stay over the weekend when there are no holidays, and the ferry only goes on Fridays and Sundays during the weekend. That being said, there never are more than a handful of people out there at the same time, spread out on an area that is roughly larger than my hometown. This time, on the other hand, it was only me and my father taking that ferry that Friday, so I knew we were going to be left alone for the weekend. Arriving on that small pier by the cabin, I could finally breathe in the fresh air of untouched nature that has always been soothing for my soul. It's like you leave behind all your troubles at home, because here they're irrelevant. At the cabin, the only things that matter is the things that keep you safe, warm and fed. We then dug out our snowmobile that was parked near the pier and drove the short trip over to the cabin. That night, we mostly spent preparing noose traps and lunch for the next day. My father told me old stories of when he went hunting back in the days and such, and we shared in a ceremonial hunter shot of a single malt whiskey. I slept well that night, as I normally do when the peace and quiet of the cabin comes over me. We got out of the cabin late the following morning due to us just enjoying the calming of a morning with no obligations. This would turn out to be a mistake, however. You see, the key point is to be out early so you can utilize the sunlight as much as possible. We knew this, but sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a lazy breakfast and watch morning TV. When we arrived at the Lavel, imagine a winter version of a teepee, that we had set up the summer next to a lake, which was now frozen of course, my father decided that he would take it easy that day and get the Lavel warmed up so that when I returned from the mountain, there would be warm food and drink waiting. I had previously spent a lot of time by myself around the area, so walking around the mountain alone never bothered me, and to this day still doesn't. I started walking up the mountain overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for using an old pair of snowshoes that was hanging in the cabin. This resulted in me using way more than I needed to get up to find some grouse I might shoot. as I knew from previous experiences that this was the area they would be in. After a lot of effort, I made it up to the area. Despite being full of tracks and feces, it was abandoned. You see, it had snowed that night, and part of the morning, so the tracks must have been somewhat fresh, but I couldn't see or hear anything. So I stalked the forest upon that mountain for an hour without any traces of life. That is probably when I noticed the silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say. There is always this deafening silence that preludes something bad, like all the animals know to get out of there. I remembered for the first time since childhood that I felt uneasy about being alone up there. But of course I wasn't about to go empty-handed back to my father, so I continued. As I was walking around, listening intently to any sort of sound that might give away any other life form, I remember being amazed at how loud my footsteps were. At this point, I was a tall but skinny boy of around 70 kilos, even though I walked as slow and controlled as humanly possible. The uneasy feeling kept creeping closer to the point where I decided to take a quick snack and regain my previous calm state of mind. As I walked back to a clearing overlooking the lake, my footsteps seemed to almost lighten, and I felt more relaxed and at ease again. I sat down on a rock and ate a bar of chocolate I bought and enjoyed the sun on my face, ridiculing myself for being spooked of what was essentially nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps coming from the direction I had just been in, loud and heavy, of a grown man. I know this because, as anyone can tell you, the sound of a biped walking on 2 feet is quite distant from our four-legged creatures such as moose or bear, especially in heavy snow. I tried calling out because I thought it was my father, who had had a change of heart, but no reply. I sat there on the rock, watching the direction of the footsteps as it grew louder. Feeling uneasy, I decided to take up my phone and try and call my dad. There on my phone, I had an unread message from my dad from 3 minutes ago. "Coffee and lunch is ready." Simultaneously, the footsteps were somehow getting louder, and I knew whatever was on the other end wasn't my dad. This, and knowing that we were supposed to be the only 2 people in the radius for many kilometers, made me instantly jump up. I grabbed my shotgun and noped out of there, and I had tightened my snowshoes. As I was making my way with haste, I could hear whatever was stalking me pick up the pace, and I realized that the sound of my own footsteps and whatever it was that was after me was almost synchronized to the point that there was only a slight difference when our feet hit the ground. I realized since then that whatever it was that had followed me had entered the forest on the mountain and was the cause of why I thought my footsteps were unnaturally loud. I remember trying my best to run in hip-deep snow, not caring that the thick layer of branches hit my cold face, leaving red marks all over them. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footprints no more than 5 meters behind me, yet when I turned around there was nothing. I pushed all I had, and when I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side from the level, the extra pair of footsteps just stopped. Exhausted by the kilometer-plus run in high snow, I made my way. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I seemed. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I didn't know what to say, and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred, so I only said that I'd spotted many tracks yet no birds. However, years later, I asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area, and the answer has always been roughly the same. Don't worry about it. Don't ask about it. Some things are better left ignored. When I was 19, I worked for a company that allocated labor to rural areas of Australia. Basically, what you did was tell them when you were available, and they'd send you to a remote farm for a few weeks where you'd do whatever they needed done. It was hard work and long hours, but good pay and good fun if you got in with a nice group of workers. When this occurred, I was working on a large property. I was told it covered roughly the same landmass as the state of Maryland, USA, about 9 hours from Sydney, and the property itself was about 40 minutes from the nearest town. In short, it was in the middle of nowhere. I was working at the farm clearing bushland with 3 other guys my age from the city. Our boss was a guy called Jeremy who owned the farm and supervised us while helping us with the work. He was pretty laid back and generally really good to us. This summer in particular was very hot, and the work was hard. So one day when the temperature hit 38, or 100 Fahrenheit, Jeremy decided to give us the afternoon off. He said he knew of a water hole on the farm about a 25-minute drive north. I was keen for a swim, but the other guys just wanted to relax for the arvo. And so he and I hopped in one of the work trucks and started heading across the property. It was mostly wide, empty expanse with a few clumps of scattered bushland. Jeremy wasn't much of a talker, so we drove more or less in silence, and after about 20 minutes, he suddenly perked up and jabbed me in the ribs. "Do you see that over there, beneath the 2 dead trees?" I should mention here that if you're not familiar with inland areas, particularly those in Australia, they are brown or red and mostly flat and bland, meaning any bright colours stick out like a sore thumb. So you can imagine our surprise when we see a large blue angular structure far off in the distance. We steer in its direction, and as we got closer we realized it was a huge blue shipping container, just sitting in the middle of nowhere. Jeremy was perplexed. I asked him if he knew what that was, but he obviously didn't. He said he hadn't seen it when he drove through the same area about 5 weeks before, and wanted to see what the hell it was. Initially we pulled a stop about 100 meters from it. At this stage, I had a really bad feeling. The whole thing wasn't right, it's hard to explain, but if you can imagine being such a foreign object in the middle of a huge barren expanse, it has to be something weird. Jeremy, however, wanted to investigate, which I understood, given it was on his property. But in truth, I was really anxious. As we got closer, things got even more bizarre. There was a big diesel generator behind it thumping away, and CCTV cameras on each side, all motion activated so they buzzed from side to side, following us as we moved. I tried to reason with Jeremy, something along the lines of, "With all this security, someone obviously doesn't want us here, let's just go." He brushed me off, however, reminding me it was his farm, and whoever had put it here was trespassing and he wanted to go inside. Despite all the surveillance, there was only a small padlock on the huge door, and we had some bolt cutters in his toolbox. After a bit of a struggle, we broke the lock and went inside. The first thing I noticed was the rush of cold air. The place was air-conditioned, which I must admit was quite pleasant for such a hot day. We searched around for a light switch, but I could already see this was some kind of IT setup. There were flashing LEDs all over the place, and the sort of hum you hear when a hard drive is working hard. When we finally switched on the light, we could see a sophisticated, albeit somewhat cluttered, office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage boxes scattered around the far wall, and several desks with computer monitors arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this stage, I felt like I was in one of those nonsensical dreams. This made absolutely no sense. We wandered to the middle and sat down at the desk to see if any computers could give us any idea of what the hell was going on. My heart was racing, and I just wanted to bolt. We'd been seen by CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring, they already knew we were here. Jeremy, on the other hand, was adamant we had to get to the bottom of this, so I put on a brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short, neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook and Microsoft Word. The best I can describe, from my lay position, is it was an endless list of computer talk. It was like the old Napster or LimeWire download screen, just constantly picking up and receiving data, then recording it on several windows. I gave up on the computers and started walking cautiously over to the far end of the container, to the big pile of storage boxes. By then I was pretty sure no one else was there, as there was nowhere to hide really, but was still incredibly on edge. I decided against my better judgment to see what was inside all of these boxes. My brief sift through this box still made me feel sick. It didn't take me long to realize that this box was full of posters, DVDs, and photos of hardcore CP. One thing that still gets to me is that it was all neatly organized into folders and smaller boxes. Those people were organized. I immediately recoiled, jumped up and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together. I said something to the effect of, "Mate, get out. This stuff is messed up." I dragged him out, composed myself, and managed to explain what I saw. We jumped back into the truck and sped back to the house. The farm had no mobile phone reception, and we hadn't brought the satellite phone, so we had to go back to the landline to call the police. Once we called them, they had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in town about half an hour from the town closest to the farms. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 4-wheel drives, and as we jumped in and led them back, things got worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open and there was a fire inside. We had only 2 small extinguishers in the cars, and these did very little. The fire department took an hour to get there, by which stage most of the damage was already done. An arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of the computer equipment described, and only traces of paper and cardboard. This meant that whoever ran it knew we were there, and had time to come and remove most of it and get away. There were various ways to get off the property, and the landmass was huge, so there was no real way to tail them, since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first place, probably due to our poor explanation on the phone. Aerial surveillance was also impossible by the time we had pieced it all together. I took a keen interest in following it up, but with no real evidence of who might be responsible, the investigation went cold. I've kept in contact with Jeremy, and the shipping container is still sitting there on the farm as it's too expensive to move. But I'll never forget what I saw in those boxes. I should start by saying that breaking into abandoned buildings is a terrible idea. I know this, and yet the thrill always pulls me back in. I love horror, I love adventure, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the Blue House. It was a brutal summer in the Midwest, the kind where the air sticks to your skin and mosquitoes treat you like an all-you-can-eat buffet, the perfect weather to go exploring. My buddy Greg and I had the perfect spot, Purgatory Woods, a stretch of dense forest in southern Michigan infamous for 2 things, teen drinking and an old Al Capone hideout. We had visited it before, taken creepy photos, even attempted an overnight stay, which, trust me, is a whole different nightmare. This time we wanted to properly check Al Capone's hideout in daylight. The drive up was perfect, windows down, music blasting, the kind of road trip that makes you feel invincible. But when we arrived, Capone's hideout was trashed beyond recognition. It looked like a landfill completely wrecked by vandals. The thrill was gone. We decided to salvage the day by hiking deeper into the woods, letting curiosity guide us. About 3 miles in, we saw it. The Blue House. It sat unnaturally alone in the clearing, as if the forest itself had pushed it away. The paint was a fading, peeling blue, and the roof was stripped bare. Off to the side, a shed sat open, filled with nothing but trash and rusting yard tools. From a distance it looked abandoned, but too normal, almost like it was waiting. That's when Greg grinned and said, "Well, we came for a thrill." We circled the house first, checking for any obvious reason not to go in. Nothing. Just tall grass in the back. No doors, no windows, like the house had no reason to acknowledge the outside world. We stood at the front door, hyping each other up. The moment we stepped inside, that excitement died. The floor was caving in, the air reeked of rot, and the walls looked sick, warped from moisture and time. But none of that mattered because the floor was covered in hundreds of photographs. Polaroids, film photos, old black and white, everything. No floorboards, just faces, families, children, strangers staring up at us beneath layers of dust and decay. "Dude, this is messed up," Greg muttered. I nodded, but my stomach was in knots. There was something off about the photos, the way they were spread out like they had been looked through recently. "Did you hear that?" Greg whispered. I rolled my eyes. Dude, I'm not gonna fall for... And then we heard it. 3 taps. I shut up. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from the hall. The sound was weird, like pencils being tossed onto a desk. No footsteps, no rustling, just that dry, deliberate tapping. Greg took a slow step back. Steve, we should go. This doesn't feel right. I wanted to leave, and every instinct was screaming at me to leave, but I shook my head. Man, we just got here. It's probably an animal. Let's just check it out, yeah? I hated how my voice didn't sound convincing. Greg exhaled sharply, then nodded, creeping forward. We moved carefully, avoiding the photos as best we could until we reached the hallway. And that's when we saw him. A man stood at the end of the hall, his massive frame blocking the doorway. He was big, not in a strong way, but heavy. His grey shirt stretched tightly around his stomach, while his dark jeans sagged. Too long at the legs, but tight at the waist. His bowl-cut hair clung to his sweaty forehead, and he was grinning. The kind of grin that curdles your blood. Greg didn't even get a word out before the man lunged. Greg staggered just in time, his scream splitting the silence as the man's thick arms swung wildly. His foot landed hard on a rusted nail, driving straight through the shoe, and his scream turned to a sob. The man pounced, slamming Greg to the floor, with the nail still embedded in his foot. Greg struggled, gasping in pain, but the guy was too strong. I don't know if it was adrenaline or pure terror, but I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a wooden plank with the nail still in it, and swung it as hard as I could. The nail slashed across the man's face, and he shrieked, clutching his cheek as blood seeped through his fingers. Greg took the chance and shoved him off, scrambling to his feet despite his damaged foot, and I grabbed him and screamed to run. We tore through the woods, branches slicing our arms and legs, lungs burning, Greg limping beside me, whimpering with every step. I never looked back. The thought that he might be right behind us barreling through the trees, with that awful grin on his face. After what felt like forever, we finally stopped, gasping for air. I turned. No one was following, just the trees in the distance. "We lost him," I whispered, but Greg didn't answer. He just stared ahead, shaking, pale as death. We were lost, stranded miles deep in a forest that suddenly felt much, much darker. It took us 2 hours to find our way back, using the one sliver of phone signal we could to find and pull up maps. At the hospital, Greg got his foot treated. The nail had gone deep, and the bruises on his neck even deeper still. I don't know what that place was, or what the man was doing there, or why the floor was covered in photos of strangers. And I don't want to know. All that I know is that I never want to see that creepy man again. This happened in 2014. I was around 20 years old. I'll give you some context. I was studying in a lovely seaside village in France, and everyone was cycling at the time. Cycling to school, to work, to parties. It was a very safe place, full of tourists and students, and I lived and studied in this city between 2012 and 2015. Up until the events I'm going to mention, I never ever felt unsafe, and didn't hear anything from my friends either. In December of 2014, my boyfriend took me to his engineering school's Christmas party. We were a large group of friends and mingled a lot. One of the guys from the group, who I didn't know personally, left the party without anyone noticing. And a month later, he was found dead in the harbour, and police never figured out what happened. I went online to check if there was any news, and it was still a cold case. I didn't know him, but I think about it all the time. Was it because he was alone? Did he fall? Did someone push him? Why didn't anyone care to walk him home? Needless to say, the city started to feel a lot less safe, but at 20 years old, I didn't have the same understanding of such things as I do now, and my life carried on. A few months passed, and then at the beginning of 2015, a friend was assaulted badly while cycling home after a party. He was found in critical condition, his body laying halfway on the road and halfway on the sidewalk. His head had been smashed on the sidewalk step, and his jaw was completely shattered. He was a big guy in every possible sense, not the sort of guy that you could push around easily. He was recovering in the hospital, but couldn't make sense of what happened. He had no idea why he was attacked on his bike. The police couldn't find suspects. 2 students my age in the same friend circle were brutally assaulted for no reason. I still cycled everywhere because I had no other choice. I lived 8 kilometers away from my school and didn't have any other means of transportation. This meant that I cycled approximately 16 to 20 kilometers every day and had been doing it since 2012. We are in the spring of 2015. I'm cycling back home from a party with my boyfriend. I had a few drinks but was not drunk. We're quite isolated and I'm just tired. My boyfriend is annoying me because he's not waiting for me, and the distance between us keeps getting bigger. Suddenly, someone jumps on me. He appears from nowhere and kicks my bike to the floor. I've been cycling so much I'm used to the bike and I let it fall between my legs. But I don't fall. I resist and stand up. It's a man. I reach for my bike, which is now on the floor, with my left hand. I'm trying to get a hold of the handlebars and he kicks me, then my hand, and kicks me again. But I'm already holding the handlebars. It hurts, but I'm lifting the bike. He says something, but I don't hear exactly what. That's when I see my boyfriend looking at me. He's a bit far away, but he's stopped cycling. He's gonna help me. The man will see I'm not alone. I'm still standing, lifting my bike. It's been maybe 2 or 3 seconds since the man jumped on me. My boyfriend's looking at me, and then he turns his back. My heart drops. He starts pedaling away. It's the dead of night and there's no one else and I'm on my own. The man keeps kicking. He wants me to let go. My hands look blue, but my grip is strong. I think about the other 2 students and it gives me strength. I think about my boyfriend. The sight of him cycling away fills me with pure rage. How can he just leave me, his girlfriend here, vulnerable? I use this rage. The man is holding some kind of glass object in his hand. I grab it with my free hand and smash it in his face. I'm furious. I'm getting the bike. Surely the glass had alcohol in it because it burns his eyes. I have a split second to launch myself and start pedaling away. He can't reach my hand anymore, so he kicks the bike one more time. I stand strong on the pedals, and he tries to chase me, but I'm much faster, and I pedal until I can no longer breathe. I feel numb. That night, I know I escaped something terrible. Due to the stress, I couldn't describe the man. I'll never know for sure if my experience was linked to the other attacks, because we were all walking and cycling on the same route. 10 years later, I can remember the look on my ex-boyfriend's face when he turned his back on me. I hope to never see either of those 2 men again. A few years back, I was driving home after shift. It was around 3 a.m. I was tired but not exhausted, just looking forward to getting home. The road was a deserted state route, 30 miles of nothing but open fields and farmland. I drive this stretch multiple times a week, and on most nights I don't pass a single or other car. Just me, the road, and the sky. And on this particular night, the sky was perfect, crystal clear. Not a cloud in sight, the kind of darkness where you can see every single star. About halfway home, I crested a hill that led into a straight, long stretch of probably 2 or 3 miles of uninterrupted road. That's when I saw it. Off to my right, hovering about 50 feet in the air over a field, was a very dark object. It was roughly the length of a pickup truck, but thicker, rounder and heavier, like a solid mass of shadow hanging in the sky. And from its side or underside, a blazing red light beamed outwards, impossibly bright against the darkness. I barely had a few seconds to take it in. It was going about 50 miles an hour, and as I passed, my brain scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. No sound, no movement, just a massive hovering object with that unearthly red glow. I wanted to stop to get a better look, but I didn't. Something about it unnerved me in a way I can't explain. I've never been the type to believe in UFOs. I mean, sure, alien life has to exist somewhere, But visiting Earth? I've always been skeptical. But if I had to paint a picture of what I think a UFO would look like, it would be what I saw that night. I've driven that stretch of road hundreds of times since, always looking, but I've never seen anything like it again. Every year, my family takes a holiday trip to Albuquerque, New Mexico. This happened about 8 or 9 years ago. My dad has always loved scenic drives, so on our way back to Phoenix, he decided to take the long way, a detour through quiet, forgotten back roads. That's how we ended up in Fence Lake, a town so isolated and silent, it felt like we'd driven straight off the map. By the time we got there, the sun was dipping below the horizon, bathing everything in that eerie in-between light, where shadows stretch long, and everything looked still but not peaceful. It was wrong. The town wasn't abandoned, not officially at least. There were homes scattered around, old and weathered, some looking like they hadn't seen a person in decades. But there was something off. No porch lights flickering on as night crept in, no sounds, no dogs barking, no cars passing by, no voices, nothing. Just an unnatural stillness, like the whole place was holding its breath. We needed directions, so I got out and walked towards the fire station. The door was unlocked, but inside, empty. Not just, no one's here right now empty, more like, no one's been here in a long time empty. Paper stacked on desks, a coffee mug left, half full, but a thick layer of dust covered everything, like time had just stopped. I stepped back outside, and that's when it hit me. We had been here for at least 15 minutes and hadn't seen a single person. No faces peeking through curtains, no one stepping out to check the mail, not even a stray cat or bird. Just silence. My gut was screaming at me to leave, but when I got back to the car I could tell my family felt it too. My dad muttered something about just picking a direction and hoping for the best, and we drove out of there as fast as possible, not looking back. Later, my dad mentioned the town to a friend of his who knew the area, and his reaction was dead serious. "You actually stopped in Fence Lake?" "Yeah, why?" "Dude, that place is on the FBI watch list. People go missing there. The residents have been known to kidnap travelers and ransom them. You're lucky you left before someone decided you weren't going to." I don't know if this is true, and I don't want to know. All I know is that we've never taken the long way home again. This is a story my grandfather told at nearly every family gathering, his voice always carrying the same hushed intensity, like he was reliving it every time. It happened when he was young, working as a lumberjack deep in the rural forests of California. Most of his time there was uneventful, until one night that haunted him for the rest of his life. It was late, the forest stretching endlessly on both sides of the narrow, winding road. He and 3 co-workers were driving home. The night was thick and silent. He and 3 co-workers were driving home. The night was thick and silent. He and another man dozed off in the back seat while the front passenger kept the driver engaged in conversation, keeping him awake on the long drive. The car rocked gently with the road and headlights slicing through the darkness. Then, without warning, the car slammed to a violent stop. My grandfather and the other man in the back lurched forward, jolted awake as the tires skidded against the pavement. Up front, the driver and passenger sat frozen, staring ahead like they'd just seen the devil himself. Following their gaze, my grandfather saw it too. Something stood in the middle of the road. Massive, unnaturally tall, a hulking silhouette, black as the void, absorbing the car's headlights rather than reflecting them. It had a broad, powerful shape, too big, too upright, and too wrong to be a bear. For a moment the world stood still. The forest, the car, the men inside, everything held its breath. Then, in the fastest three-point turn my grandfather had ever witnessed, the driver spun them around and gunned it in the opposite direction, flying down the road as if the thing might give chase. No one spoke the rest of the way back. Later they tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bear startled by the car, rising on its hind legs. But that didn't explain the way it stood there, motionless, watching them. It didn't explain the feeling that my grandfather never quite managed to shake, like whatever they saw that night wasn't just standing in the road. Despite all his retellings and despite the effort to laugh it off over the years, he never once claimed he believed the bear theory. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years. Long hauls, short runs, deliveries to the middle of nowhere, I've done it all. But there's one stretch of road I'll never drive again. It happened about 4 years ago late at night. I had a delivery out in the boonies, a last-minute haul that I wasn't too happy about. I was already running on fumes, dead tired, and just wanted to get it done so I could turn around and go home. The road was a narrow 2-lane highway, cutting through miles of nothing. No houses, no streetlights, just empty fields and thick, dark woods pressing in on both sides. The only light came from my headlights and the full moon hanging low in the sky. I was cruising at a steady 55, my high beams carving a path through the dark, when I saw something move on the road up ahead, a man walking along the shoulder, dead center in my headlights. My stomach dropped instantly. Something was off. Then it hit me. I couldn't see his legs. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, like maybe the angle of the road or shadow was covering them, but as it got closer my brain started screaming at me. No, no, no. There was nothing below his waist. Just a torso and arms swinging, head tilted slightly forward, walking as if nothing was wrong. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching against the asphalt, heart hammering in my chest. And the second the truck stopped, I flicked on the interior lights and looked back on the road. He was gone. I sat there gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My headlights still stretched down the road, illuminating nothing but empty pavement. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Perhaps I'd imagined it. Maybe I was too tired, but deep down I knew what I saw. But I still had to check. Against every instinct in my body, I reached for my flashlight, shoved the door open and stepped out. The night air was silent. No wind, no crickets, just the low hum of my truck's engine. I walked to the front of my truck, shining my light over the pavement, and there was nothing. I looked down the road. Nothing. I even stepped onto the shoulder and scanned the ditch, half expecting to see a body, or worse, half of one. But there was nothing except gravel and weeds. A sudden chill crawled up my spine like the air itself turned to ice. That was enough. I backed away, jumped into my truck and threw it into drive. I didn't care about the speed limit. I needed to get the hell out of there. I finished the delivery white-knuckled and on edge the whole time. But when it was time to head back, I took the long way home. It added an extra hour, but I didn't care. And I never drove that stretch of road again, and told my employer that they couldn't make me. The valley was empty. No streetlights, no houses, no signs of life. Just an endless stretch of cracked pavement cutting through an abyss of pure black nothing. The only light came from my high beams, slicing feebly through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead in a sickly yellow glow. It was 1 a.m., and my friends and I had been driving for hours, trapped in this dead space between nowhere and nothing. The world outside the car felt empty, and that's when we saw it. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, or just a mirage in the dark, a shadow cast by a trick of the headlights, but no. It was real. A man made of tumbleweed. I didn't even process what I was looking at. He stood in the dead center of the road, a towering tangled mass of dried, gnarled branches, twisted into the shape of a man. Too perfect, too deliberate. But the thing that really made my stomach drop is that we don't have tumbleweeds where I live. He was just suddenly there, frozen mid-stride as if he had been walking, then stopped the moment we saw him. The beams of my headlights caught every brittle, interwoven detail. His arms, his legs, his head tilted slightly to the side as if listening. I didn't swerve, I didn't even brake. I was too stunned to react. And then we hit him. Or we should have. My friend and I screamed, the impact bracing for the inevitable crunch of branches and bone, but nothing. No sound, no impact, no resistance. We passed through him like he wasn't even there, like he never had been at all. The second he vanished in the rearview mirror, my hands went ice cold on the steering wheel. My friend in the passenger seat was hyperventilating, eyes still glued to the windshield. But the two people in the back were silent. I looked at them through the mirror, my pulse hammering in my throat. They were staring at us like we'd lost our minds. "Dude, what the hell was that?" I gasped. The guy in the back seat frowned. What was what? They hadn't seen it. I exchanged a look with my passenger, her face pale, pupils blown wide with terror. We both saw the same thing, but the ones in the back? Nothing. I drove much faster after that. No one spoke, no one dared look behind us, and I have no idea what I saw that night. I don't know why it was only us, but sometimes I wonder, did we really pass through it? Or did it pass through us? I'm a rural sheriff's deputy patrolling deep in the Appalachian Mountains, with only two of us covering nearly 500 miles of twisting, isolated roads. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff. Some things can be explained, drunks, wildlife, backwoods folk who prefer to stay unseen, but these 2 nights I still can't wrap my head around them. It was around 2 a.m. on a moonless night, the kind of darkness that swallows your headlights. I was cruising at 60 down a long stretch of rolling hills, when I finally met a dip, and that's when I saw her, a woman standing in the middle of the road. I had no time to react, she was dead center in my lane, maybe only 10 to 15 feet away. I slammed the brakes, locked them up hard so my Crown Vic fishtailed at the last second. I braced for impact, fully expecting to hear the sickening thud of a body against my hood. But there was nothing. The car skidded to a stop, my pulse hammering. I looked around expecting to see a crumpled body, or at the very least an injured woman. But she was gone. The road was empty, stretching into the darkness like nothing had happened. No sign of movement, no places she could have run. Just silence. And then I realized where I had stopped. Right next to an old abandoned church and cemetery. I stepped out, flashlight sweeping the area, and called out and listened, but nothing. Just the distant hum of crickets and the weight of something unseen pressing down on me. Eventually the creeping wrongness got to me and I left. There were no houses within miles of that church, no one should have been there. A few years later, maybe before, maybe after, honestly I don't remember, but it was the same part of the county, just a few miles down from the same road. It was another late night patrol. Up ahead was a 4-way intersection, and as I approached I noticed headlights sitting motionless on the road about 150 yards away. They weren't moving, just idling. Maybe drunk, maybe someone broke down. So I slowed, and that's when the headlights went out. I hesitated, just staring into the blackness where the vehicle should have been. Then suddenly they clicked back on and lifted. The 2 lights rose 10 to 12 feet off the ground, higher than any car and truck, and then merged into a single, blinding light. The second my brain started screaming it wasn't normal, the light vanished again. I flipped on every light and floored it, cutting through the darkness to find whatever had been there. But there was no evidence anything had been there. No vehicles, no equipment, no sign of anything that could have made those lights. The road was empty and stretching on into the void, and there was no way anything could have turned around or disappeared without me seeing it. I don't know what I saw that night. I tell myself the woman in the road was just a trick of the mind, but the lights were some weird electrical phenomenon or reflection. But deep down, I know better. I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, which meant long, lonely drives through the most desolate parts of Canada, places where the roads stretched forever, and civilization felt like a distant memory. I had plenty of eerie nights, but one still unsettles me to this day. I was somewhere in northeast British Columbia or northwest Alberta, cutting through the wilderness in the dead of night. The only light came from my high beam slicing through the darkness, my truck the only thing moving for miles. It was the kind of night where the world outside the windshield felt unreal. That's when I saw it, a massive black shape in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering, assuming it was a moose, but as I skidded to a stop just feet from it, I realized I had no idea what I was looking at. The thing was roughly 6 feet tall, standing on 4 legs. But that was the only detail I could make out. My headlights should have revealed fur, skin, or at the very least eyes reflecting in the light, but there was nothing. No texture, no shine, no movement, just a void in the road. Then I saw more of them. Lurking in the ditches on both sides of the road were 5 or 6 identical to the first. A wave of dread washed over me, an instinctive kind of fear, the kind you feel when something is very, very wrong. The longer I stared, the more I became convinced these weren't animals, they weren't even things. They were like holes in reality, places where the night had gathered and refused to let go. I snapped out of it and swerved around the shape in the road, forcing myself not to look back, and gunned it down the highway. My pulse didn't slow until I saw the distant glow of a gas station an hour later. I don't believe in the paranormal. I want to believe I was hallucinating from exhaustion, just another trick of the dark. But sometimes I wonder what the hell they were, and if they let me leave. I was on a cross-country road trip, somewhere deep in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when my tire blew out. Just my luck, flat as a pancake. And when I went to call AAA, I had no service, not even a single bar. So I get out and start the process of changing the tire myself, squatting away a swarm of mosquitoes so thick the air felt like it was alive. I wasn't even 5 minutes in when a police cruiser pulled up behind me, boots crunching against the gravel of the hard shoulder, and asked if I needed help. "Yes, thank you, officer," I say, relieved. He nodded slowly and then smirked. "Well, you're in luck. I happen to know the best tow truck driver in the area, and he can take you to town to get you all fixed up, no problem." The way he said it made me hesitate. Something about the way his eyes lingered, that smirk never quite leaving his face. But the mosquitoes were relentless, and truthfully I had no clue what I was doing with the spare, so I agreed. He called the tow truck, and without another word, he got back in his cruiser and drove off. Not even 10 minutes later, the tow truck pulled up. No logo, no markings, just a plain white truck with rust creeping up the sides. The driver hopped out, a burly guy with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Where am I towing you to?" I'm not sure, just somewhere I can get this fixed." "Well, you're in luck," echoing the cop's words exactly. "I know just the guy. Only place open this late." At that point, I just wanted to get moving. The air was thick and buzzing, and the last light of the sun was dying fast, so I got in his truck and we took off. We drove maybe 5 miles before pulling into what barely qualified as a town, more like a collection of abandoned buildings except for one dimly lit gas station and an auto shop attached to it. No people, no cars, just the sound of cicadas screeching in the distance. The tow truck driver and the repair guy, another grisly-looking man who might have been his twin, stood around chatting while my tire was being fixed. I say fixing, but for the next 2 hours it didn't seem like they did a damn thing except smoke and laugh to themselves. Finally they came out, wiping their hands on dirty rags. "All set," the mechanic said, handing me 2 bills, one for the tow and one for the repair. $1,200 for a 5-mile tow and 1 tire on my beat-up 91 Grand Am? I felt my stomach drop. The car wasn't even worth that much. "You gotta be kidding me," I said, feeling heat rise in my face. The tow truck driver grinned. "Sorry, bud, cash only." I exhaled sharply. "I don't have that much cash on me." He nodded like he expected that. "Well, you're in luck." And I swear to God I felt something creep down my spine. "ATM's right next door. My buddy owns the gas station." I turned towards the station and sure enough, a lone ATM flickered inside. I hesitated, but what choice did I have? I went in and withdrew as much as I could, maxing out 3 or 4 cards, each with a ridiculous withdrawal fee. My hand shook as I fed the machine over and over, knowing I was getting robbed in real time. And then I looked up. Behind the counter, the gas station attendant watched me with that same amused grin. And behind him, laughing with their mouth full of Doritos, were the tow truck driver, repair guy, and the cop. They were all in on it and had been from the start. I forced myself to stay calm, handed over the cash, and drove out of there, the mosquitoes still feasting on my arms as if they knew I couldn't be staying long. I spent the rest of the trip itching like hell and wondering. The cop arrived suspiciously fast. My other 3 tries were practically new, and the way they kept saying, "You're in luck," like they'd done this before. Be careful when you're out in the middle of nowhere. Picture this, Connecticut in the middle of winter of January 2008. We had just gotten lots of snow. Me and 4 other friends have been working hard at our small community college, and we wanted to do something over winter break. We ended up finding a cute little cabin near a lake up near Orient, Maine. And after much fuss from our parents, we put our money down and started getting ready for the trip. Keep in mind this was before the shift from MapQuest to the common use of GPS, TomToms, etc., and before my cell phone was attached to my hip. We found directions on MapQuest and set off on our first taste of freedom in a while. We packed into my friend's small red Acura and drove the 8 hours plus from Connecticut after our last college course around 2 p.m. Looking back, it was a horrid idea to pack 5 kids into a small car in the middle of winter and drive in the northern states. It was cold and dreary the whole ride up. That wet and cold sticks to you. The driver, Jay, was in love with his Acura. He had very strict rules for driving, gassing it up, and stopping. So we settled into the car for a long stretch of driving and blasted some music to pass the time. Further north, we got the weather. The roads became very challenging due to icing. The further up you got into mid-Maine, the further the distance between exits. No lights, just the moon and stars. Looming pine forests lined the 2-lane highway. And it's a sparsely populated area. Tiny little towns miles off the highway, peppering the landscape. Because of this, we agreed to make one long food stop only for dinner, a delicious Taco Bell, before heading into the more desolate areas. During dinner, I made the rookie mistake of getting a giant Sprite, but made sure to use the bathroom before we left, and we continued on into the night. Infrequently, I spotted glimmers of light from little homes and towns passing from the passenger seat, and after a few hours, there really came a point I had to pee. When I mention it, it's usually at the last minute. It was an imminent nuclear-level disaster if we didn't stop soon, but there were no signs for a gas station on any of the last 10 exits in the last 40 minutes. I was ready to pull over on the side of the road. It was beyond painful, but my friend driving was paranoid and refused. He said something didn't feel right, and that it didn't feel safe to stop. Now, I'm usually very good at sensing strangeness, but I was so distracted by my body mechanics that I didn't care. I pressed my eyes shut, drummed my hands and fingers and started singing with the music, and pleading to whatever could hear me, anything to help distract me. As if the universe heard my plea and I manifested it myself, the next exit had a small sign for a locally owned gas station. After a little protest, I let Jay know his car would soon be baptized in my urine, and we pulled off, and drove another 10 damned minutes until we pulled up at this tiny, dimly lit, decrepit gas station. Nothing surrounded us for miles. There was a large paved area that surrounded this small building, seemingly to make it easier for larger trucks with small trailers to pull around the back. A dumpster sat in the back left by the trees. No lights in the parking lot, just light from the silver of the waxing moon. Inside the shop were 2 green fluorescent lights, but they barely reached the 2 old pumps outside. It seemed like the darkness was encroaching on the sickly-looking gas station ready to swallow it. The moonlight didn't seem to touch it. The creepy feeling we all had started to talk about was growing stronger, and we chalked it up to unfamiliar territory and the fact that it was the dead of winter in the middle of the night. I teleported out of the passenger seat and inside, barely getting out the word bathroom, when the tired, middle-aged attendant slowly reached for the keys and tossed them to me without a word, crooking his hand and pointing to the outside corner of the small building, into the dark, back part of the building. My stomach got that quick anxiety pang. I strongly remember having such an uneasy feeling about going back there, and as I ran back out the door, I demanded everyone come back and stand outside to wait for me, for safety and company. My boyfriend obliged, and the others understandably stayed in the car. I rounded the corner and did a brief double take as I saw someone standing by the dumpster. The moonlight reflected off their dark, short hair and what looked to be like a fur-lined coat. The urge to pee was too strong for me to care at that moment, and I felt reassured hearing my boyfriend's footsteps behind me. I struggled to unlock the door, and as I made it inside, I fumbled for a switch. Much to my delight, I discovered there was no lighting as I started to relieve myself. I called through the beat-up metal door for something, anything to light up this closet of a bathroom, as I had left my phone in the cup holder. I heard a small shuffling sound, and my imagination was running wild. Bugs crawling around the walls, bumping into spent toilet paper, a person standing in the corner. My boyfriend at the time thankfully had a flashlight. He was in the military and always came prepared. I didn't lock it, so he poked it in through the crack. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness at this point. I remember seeing the treetops, the starry night in all its beauty, and some dark mass by the dumpster again. Through the crack before clicking on the light which blinded me. My sixth sense, for lack of a better term, was starting to become more prevalent, now that I had started to get physically relieved. I kept telling myself it's just an unfamiliar area in the dead of night. I felt overall unwelcome, and felt the need to rush. I recall my boyfriend having asked me if I was almost done, to which I replied I wasn't even close, and I heard some talking getting closer. Sam, the other girl on the trip, made a comment along the lines of, "You see that? Who would be outside at this hour in the cold?" I heard her boyfriend say something like, "It's 10 degrees outside, there's no way." And another strange voice came through the door. It was the gas station attendant coming with them. I later learned that Sam had decided to pee as well since we were stopping, and she saw the figure too. She went inside to tell the attendant about someone outside, and she mentioned he didn't respond but came out from behind the counter. As soon as I was finished buttoning up my jeans, I felt a million times better, and I swear I heard a breath in my ear. As corny as it sounds, it just went, even though I had this deep pit of fear and unease growing in my gut ever since we arrived. In the moment, I convinced myself it was just me shuffling around on this dirty-ass tile, though I know I didn't move my feet. Dirt crunching softly does not sound like a human breath, and just remembering this, my whole body is chilling up. I immediately raised the flashlight up to the mirror that was fogged with age and soap scum. No one was behind me. I was ready to hit the road and get the hell out of there. I flung the door open and booked it through my boyfriend, Sam, and her boyfriend, and the attendant, who was standing a bit hunched near them. Odd. I scanned the empty pavement. There seemed to be this lingering darkness hanging around the forest line where it met the parking lot. I turned to the dumpster and no one was there. It should have been reassuring, but it ended up freaking me out even more. I think we should go. Sam, do you really have to pee? I remembered she looked uncomfortable. They all did. It was like the attendant was trying to block us from rounding the corner and getting to the front of the store, or keeping us in the area so something could sneak up and attack us. I got that threatening feeling. In hindsight, maybe he was making sure we didn't trash anything. I heard Jay start up the Acura and gave the attendant a wide berth. He wasn't saying anything, wasn't looking at us, and I swear the darkness that seemed to be devouring the light from the shop earlier was emanating off or around him. You know when you can just tell someone has bad intentions? Everything screamed in me that it was time to go. Sam and everyone picked up on the hint and rushed to the pumps, piling into the car, and we pulled out. We laughed about it, and once we were 20 minutes away down one of the main freeways, we made it to the cabin and enjoyed our first night there. The second part of the story happened the next day. We bought some snacks and cereal, and after messing around enjoying the frozen lake, we watched movies all day. We quickly realized we needed more sustenance, and had asked one of the neighboring cabins if there was a town that we could get food or supplies. The neighbor told us about a Walmart or some place up Route 1 to Holton. The populated town was almost an hour away. The neighbor said to just drive straight for about 45 minutes and that we'd be in downtown before we knew it. It was later in the evening, the sun had gone down, and we all piled into Jay's Acura again, me in the front seat and my boyfriend right behind me, Sam and her boyfriend next to him. Jay was super nervous to drive. Temperatures had gone from single digits to negatives, and the wet had turned to ice in some areas. But we made the slow and steady trip to Holton to get our supplies, and then made our way back to the cabin. Halfway there, rounding one of the bends, he saw a person on the road. No distinguishing features according to him. Jay had started to panic, yet slowed down and turned the car to avoid them, but ended with hitting a patch of black ice. Next thing we know, we're spinning out of control slowly off the road, and I remember putting my feet up on the dash and my hand on the ceiling as we hit a telephone pole with my passenger door. We descended into the snow-covered ditch, mostly unharmed, discovering later as we were towed by good Samaritans that we were 10 feet from landing in a river. Jay mentioned why he started swerving, to which he told there was absolutely no one on the road. We were incredibly lucky, and weren't the only car to slide off the road in the last 24 hours. There was a tan Mazda van about 30 feet to the left of that had also shared a similar fate the night before. They, however, had landed in the water but still survived. Poor Jay was beside himself with heartbreak due to his poor car and the damages. Thankfully, there was a body shop up in Holton that could help. He swears, based on what we were telling him on the car ride up the night before, that something had followed us, or attached to us. He was adamant it must have been the person from the gas station, but we didn't see what he saw. Maybe the attendant cursed us, or maybe it was just bad luck. But we're grateful nothing more came from it. We ended up doing a little seance prayer that night to try and detach whatever energy seemed to follow us, and had no issues for the remainder of the trip. We aren't really friends anymore, but that's the story, and I'm glad that we all made it back safely. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Here's to hoping you enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. I had a lot of fun reading them and finding them, so if you did, it's always nice to hear about it in the comments. If you'd like some extra perks from Mort, you can find out what those are by following the links in the description. You get your name at the end and a bunch of cool other stuff. And a huge thanks to my existing members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Their support goes a hell of a long way and means the world, so thank you. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.